Welcome to the next nugget in our Linux in the Real World series. This time we're going to talk about DNS, or the Domain Name Services. Now what does that mean? Basically what I have here, what's in a name? It resolves things like www.cbtnuggets.com into an IP address. So your computer or cell phone or tablet or server or whatever it is you have that gets on the internet, it resolves from a name that we can understand, like something.com, into an IP address. So that's what DNS does. We're going to learn a few things. We're going to learn about how to configure the server, the bind server. Bind is the name of the process that serves DNS. It's kind of an ugly configuration file, but I want to show it to you nonetheless because you should know what you're looking at so you can modify it if you have to. Later on, we're actually going to talk about GUI tools to manage this, but for right now I want to show you the configuration file. Then we're going to talk about internal and external, or split DNS. This is very, very, very common. It's known by a couple names. I like to call it split DNS, but you can call it internal, external, or there's probably a bunch of other things you can call it. But basically, it just means the IP addresses will resolve differently depending on if you're inside your network or outside. And of course, with that awesome power comes dangers, so we'll make sure to address those. And then I want to finish off the nugget with a couple really neat tricks, things like round robin DNS and stuff like that. So let's get right to the command line and get started with this nugget. DNS is something that you use every day, but you may not think too much about it. So let's take a look at it on the command line on our server and learn what we can learn. So what I've done here is I have a system with bind 9 already installed. Now to do that, you would just type sudo apt-get, you'd have to spell install correctly, bind 9, and you'll see here that for me it's already installed, which is fine. But that just installs the server, and really I want to look at the configuration files. So if you go into the etc or etc directory, bind, this is in Ubuntu. This directory could be a number of places. You just want to search for, basically you want to find the name d.conf file, and I know that's confusing because it's the bind daemon, or the bind program is the DNS server, but the configuration file is called named.conf. So that's a little bit confusing. A lot of times you'll find this in the var named folder instead of the etc bind directory. But like I said, look for this named or named.conf file, and that's generally where things are going to be, where we're going to start with things. And we're going to start with that right now, just to look at what I've done before we started here. Actually, I didn't change this one at all, but this one actually just includes the other configuration files. This is the options files, the .local file, which is what we're going to look at in a second, and then default zones that come with it. So I actually didn't mean to look at that one. So let's look at the name.conf.local. Ubuntu actually sets this one up ready to go for you to add zone files. And again, DNS, in this nugget, we're not going to learn all the nuances and understand all there is to know about DNS. I just want you to be able to go into a system and figure out what's going on and do a little bit of troubleshooting, do a little bit of configuration tweaking. But I mean, there are literally, and I do mean literally, books written on the on bind and on the DNS protocol. But basically, here is one of the files. This could be included in the name d.conf file, but they've just included another file called named.conf.local. And I've added two little stanzas here. This zone called home, and this is my top level domain. So this is as if I were adding a .com. I could do something like, and actually this is read only, so we're not going to be able to write a change, which is fine because I don't want to. But let's say we wanted to add home.org. So then it would be our home.org domain that we're dealing with, but that's actually a legitimate one on the internet, and I'm just setting one up locally for us here. So home is, just picture that as like a .com or .org. We're going to set up .home, which doesn't exist in the real world, but it's going to exist inside our network. All right, so this is the basic format for setting up a file for a zone. You do zone, then the name of the zone, open the little squiggly curly cues here, curly braces. What type is it? It's a master domain. That comes into play with some advanced DNS configuration. You can be a slave DNS server, and then you just get your information from a master, but you have to have at least a master. Otherwise, having a slave is silly because you have to point it at a master. So we're going to set up, this is set up as a master, and then this is the other thing you want to look at, where the zone file is located. Now again, this can be anywhere. Usually in systems it's in the var named or named folder, but here in Ubuntu and where we're going to place it, it's in the etc bind directory. And it's called db.home, database.home. This is the zone file that we're going to look at next. And then the other thing that you want to set up, and this one's even more confusing, but it's really important if you want your network to work right. This is the reverse domain. So here is the domain, the straightforward domain, the forward zone. This is the reverse zone. And if you look, when we look at this file in a minute, you're going to see that it's the 192.168.1.anything domain, which is what the home domain points at. So here the reverse is 1.168.192. See how it's backwards, 192.168.1. And then this in-addr-arpa, this is just how you set up a reverse domain. Again, this is going to be a master, and then where the zone file for this, it's going to be in that same etc bind directory, but this is what the name of it's going to be. You want to name it in this fashion because it's just how reverse domains are set up. So rev.1.168.192, and again, notice it's backwards, 192.168.1. whatever. So remember, it's backwards. Refer back to this if you want to set up your own test file. But anyway, it's set up the same way with the curly brace and then the semicolon at the end. Now, I showed you that just so we can edit the home domain, which is the zone file that we just referenced. Again, we also have this one back here that we referenced. We'll look at that next. But this is the db.home zone that we just looked at. All right, so let's look at that, see what it looks like on the inside. And this is the file that if you add records, this is where you're going to add the record to. All right, so let's look at some of the things. I don't want to have to explain everything too much in depth, but the top line has this in.s, or the domain that we're referencing. Again, for us, it's just home. You have to put that dot on the end of it. And there's a name server. You have to specify the name server, and what the name of that name server is going to be our server.home. Again, this is just a format that you're going to see. This is most likely going to be set up, but you can tweak it. And that's the important thing I want you to know, is how to tweak something. Now here, this is the most important part of the file, this serial number, because when you edit a zone file, not only do you have to, save the changes and then restart the name server daemon, but you also have to make sure that the serial number is incremented. Because if it's not incremented, then it's not going to refresh to like slave zones or anything like that. It's going to think that nothing changed. Why it can't just detect change, I don't know. But that's just the rule. So there's actually no there's no required standard on how to increment the serial number in your file, but the standard that I've seen everywhere, I've never seen any other standard other than the year, so 2012, the month 10 for October, and today is the 7th, so 07, and then a 2-digit counter, if you will. So this is the first time I've edited the file, so it's going to be 01. If I edited it again, it would be 02, 03, 04, all the way up to 99. So apparently this arbitrary limit, you can only edit a file 99 times in one day. But that's not really true. You could always add a third digit if you really were into editing your zone file. All right, this other stuff down here refers to the slaves, which we're not going to set up, but how long the slaves refresh and how long they get the new data, and also how long the maximum cache time for a computer to keep its data if it can't connect. All right, so this is the opening stanza for this particular zone. Again, this is our zone, the home zone. And down here is where we start adding. These are records, where we start adding records. So an A record, so in an A record, this IP address. Now since there's nothing before here, you notice like down here for the name server, the in A record is 192.168.1.89. I added a record for our firewall, so firewall in an A record 192.168.1.1. But up here, you notice there's nothing before the IN. Well, that means that if you just like look for the home domain naked with nothing before it, just the straight up domain home, it's going to resolve to this. This is kind of like it's called a dot record. And what this does, like if you have a www.imreallycool.com, well, the imreallycool.com is specified in a line like this if you want that to resolve to something. Because there's imreallycool.com would be the domain, and you have to have a way to specify the domain itself as having an IP address, and this is how you do it, just with an empty INA for a record line. All right, and then we've specified again that NS1 is the name server, which happens to be the same computer that we're on. So if this all looks confusing, just know that this is where you would add things. You would add things like workstation. A record means it's a pointer to have a direct IP address, and it doesn't have to be within your network, but it helps if it is within your network for reverse mapping. But nonetheless, you can add any addresses you want, and you map them to this. So this is how it's basically set up. This is the way a zone file is set up. And again, if you make a change, you want to increment that serial number and then restart the server. So I'm going to quit without saving. And basically, to restart the server in Ubuntu, you go to bind 9, restart, and of course you have to be root to do it. Sudo. And it's going to go, yeah, it gives me some stuff about my host isn't authorized to connect. I haven't really fully set this thing up, but it's set up enough that we can look and see some of the things that are going on. So I do want to show you. Let's clear the screen. So I have my server set up with the home domain is what we can ping, right? So let's use the dig command. If you don't know the dig command, this is to do a DNS lookup. And then @ and the @ symbol means what server do you want to look at. Even if it's not your DNS server, you can tell it to query this server. So let's say, hey, server at 127.0.0.1, which is the local host, always the same computer, give me the IP address for server.home. And it's going to say, hey, I know server.home. That address is right there. Remember, that's the one that was inside our zone record. All right, it also tells you the name server for that, which is that NS record that we set up. The name ns1.home, which is right down here. ns1.home, it's the same thing right here, but it's not just that. We can also dig at 127.0.0.1 firewall.home. Remember, we set that one up too? And sure enough, it says, all right, the IP address for that is 1.1, and it uses this name server 1, and it tells us what the name server address is. It's the same name server address because it's that .home domain. All right, so that is our name server for that domain. So that's basically what it looks like to modify a zone file set up in bind. Again, bind, you can read books and books and books on it, so I'm not going to go too much in depth other than to say you want to look for these sorts of files on your system. named.conf, and then the DB folders. Oh, one more thing I'll just look at it real quick, is the reverse lookup. And basically what the reverse lookup does, 89, I entered a reverse record for the 192.168.1.89, and the way to format that is in pointer ptr to home dot. All right, so that means, since this is the reverse record for 192.168.1, the .89, this is a reverse lookup for strictly home. So if we wanted to add something for server, we would do that, 89 inptr server.home. Here, in name server ns1.home, so we can do a reverse lookup there. It's just it's a way to make sure that DNS is not spoofed. You've probably heard of reverse lookups. Basically, that's what it means. Every time you have a network section that is referenced in one of your zone files, you need to have a reverse record for that particular section of network that contains reverse lookups for all of the addresses. Again, just that last octet, because this is the 192.168.1 reverse record, so just that last octet of 89, we just have to set a reverse record for so that DNS works properly. I don't want to spend any more time here other than, like I said, look for these files, check out the comp files, but know that if you want to edit your DNS server, you do it in the zone file specified, in our case in the named.conf.local, but in any of these named.conf files, and find the zone file and edit that zone file. You can make your changes in there, and then make sure you increment that serial number before you restart your server. All right, so that is, in a quick 10-minute blast of information, how the bind server is set up on your computer. Again, we're going to learn in some later nuggets that there are some GUI tools to make this a lot easier, but this gives you a taste of what the bind service is all about. So the next thing I want to talk about is this internal external split DNS thing. Now, and this may sound like a big deal, but it's not really that big of a deal, and it's super simple to do for individual computers. So basically what we're talking about, let's go back to our computer here. All right. Basically, what if I, instead of db.home, what if I had db.cbtnuggets.com? See, I could make a zone file for cbtnuggets.com. I could set my thing to be the master for cbtnuggets.com. And then I could edit or add A records with local IP addresses. Do you see how this would work? And I could put it in the 192.168 range, and then I could add a record like we added a record for firewall.home. I could add a record for www.cbtnuggets.com and set it to any address I want. Now, if that sounds scary and you're like, but that would break CBT Nuggets for the whole world. Well, no, because we're not truly authoritative. Just because we create a file, we're authoritative in this particular world, in our server, or inside your LAN. So you could, if you're the system administrator and you have access to the main DNS server, you could set up a complete master zone file for a domain like cbtnuggets.com, and when anybody queries that, they would get a local 192.168 or whatever your local address scheme is. Now, this is beneficial if, let's say, we really were in the cbtnuggets.com offices, and that's where their servers were located, and we wanted all of our users to hit www.cbtnuggets.com just by hitting the local internal address instead of going through the internet. Well, if we had a local zone inside, and it would be a fake zone, if you will, because we don't really have the the authority to be real domain servers for this, but you could set it up so that your local internal users get your local internal addresses, and that's called split DNS, and it's very convenient in an environment where you want to have your internal addresses different from what the rest of the internet would see. But let's say we don't want to set up a zone file because that's really complicated. Well, luckily in Linux we have the awesome ability to edit the etc host file. And actually Windows people have this too, but this is a Linux nugget. So we're going to look in here and you'll see this is where you can specify local DNS things, which means that before it even asks the DNS server, it's going to look in here. All right, so let's say we wanted to set up 192.168.1.1, and let's say that I want to tell my computer that that is www.cbtnuggets.com. That's all we have to do is add just that into this file, etc. hosts, save it, and now if I ping www.cbtnuggets.com, I'm going to get this internal address, even though, we know that that's not the real true address for cbtnuggets.com. But the scary thing is now my computer thinks that this is the address for cbtnuggets.com. So if I try to open a link in a browser, it's actually going to go to my router, which now is running pfSense, which actually is based on BSD. So don't tell anybody that this Linux guy is using pfSense. But why did it go to that? Well, because my firewall is 192.168.1.1. And even though I tried to go to www.cbtnuggets.com, my computer thinks the address for that is now this. So you can see how you can set up some really cool things. And it's really super simple to do locally, because all you have to do is edit this host file and it's instantly active. There's no serial numbers to worry about or anything like that. Let me get rid of those, save my file. And now, if we ping cbtnuggets.com, we'll see that we are no longer getting a 192 address. We're getting this 184 blah 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 address. And now if I actually open up a browser again, it'll take us to CBT Nuggets as opposed to my internal router. So that's a way that you can fool DNS into going wherever you want. This is going to be extremely useful when we talk about Apache and web servers and virtual hosts. So remember how cool this is and how useful this is, because we're definitely going to go back to this and you'll see why this is such a powerful tool. All right, so I've kind of explained what this internal, external, or split DNS means, and you can do this a couple ways. One, by setting up a master database file or a master zone file for a bind server, or per computer you can just do it much more simply with the etc hosts file. Now, dangers that we're talking about, danger Will Robinson. One of the things that you can mess up is here. You noticed I added that record for cbtnuggets.com to my host file, and all of a sudden I couldn't get there anymore because my computer thought that was the real address. Well, that's a danger, but also sometimes firewalls like my pfSense firewall actually was really intelligent at first, and it noticed by doing DNS lookups on its own that I was being fooled, if you will, that I was being redirected into my internal network instead of going through the firewall, and it was really crafty. So sometimes your firewall will catch this and think that you're trying to do some man-in-the-middle attack. So it can be dangerous. Make sure you test it before you put it in production. I mean, you may have to tweak your firewall to make sure that it's aware what's going on, or that it doesn't block redirected traffic based on DNS stuff. All right. And then neat tricks. Well, I didn't mean to cross that out, but neat tricks is just that. We talked about editing the etc host file. One other really kind of neat thing you can do with DNS is kind of poor man's load balancing, if you will. We'll look really quickly back at our zone file, and I just want to show you one of the cool things that you can do. Okay, really quickly, I made a change to our DNS server to show you this really cool thing that we can do. So I'm just going to, I didn't make you go through and do it with me. I'll just show you basically what happened. So notice I changed the serial number because I made a change, and the change I made is, remember our original record for the server, the A record that pointed to 192.168.1.89? Well, I added two more identical A records but pointing to different IP addresses. All right, so these are two other addresses on my internal network. And the really cool thing is, if you're using this as your DNS server, just by having these three A records, it will do round robin. So let's say I want to ping server.home. I get this address, 192.168.1.11. But what if I do it again, ping server.home? This time I get 192.168.1.10. And then you can probably guess what's going to happen this next time I do it. I get the third one. And it just keeps going around, round robin style. And this is a really neat way. You can do this in the regular internet too, on the real internet, because this is a valid way to load balance. So let's say we had three different web servers all serving the same web page. It gets complicated if there's a common database, in the back end or whatever. But let's say we just had static web pages served on these three different servers. What we can do is set up DNS to round robin load balance these. So every third person's going to get, three people in a row are going to get three different servers, and it's going to keep going around and around and around. It's really a simple way to load balance. Yes, there's a lot of issues, and if it's a secure page and they all of a sudden get a second server that's a different IP address, it's going to complain. But for very simple purposes, it's a neat way to do load balancing, and it's definitely the simplest. You just add three records into it. All right, let's look back and make sure if we have all the cool stuff covered for DNS before we move on to our next nugget. All right, I just want to look over this one last time before we call the quits on this nugget. We looked at server config. We looked at it a couple different times. One when I made changes, one to initially set it up. You know what it is? I urge you, if you're really interested in configuring a bind server, get a book and read up on it, or at the very least go through this nugget a couple times at the beginning and try to set up your own DNS zones at home just to get used to what's going on, and then stick around for later nuggets when we talk about some GUI tools for setting them up, because that makes things a lot easier, and you don't have to remember the serial number incrementation and all that kind of stuff. Internal, external, split DNS. This is very, very commonly used in a corporate environment or in a small business environment where you have, you want your users to go to www.ourcoolwebsite.com, but you don't want them to access the internet to do that. You want it to all happen internally. So you set up fake or split DNS so that when they try to get that address, they get the internal address, and it works really cool. We also learned some neat tricks using the hosts file as a one-man split DNS, if you will, so you can set up your host file to give you domain resolution for whatever you want. And then we did mention a couple dangers, and I circled it in red a bunch of times just because it's dangerous, I guess. But just that your firewall might freak out if it realizes that you're trying to feed your users false IP information. Not all of them, but every once in a while they'll catch that. And then the other neat trick is that round robin DNS that you can do. For some reason, that just really tickles me. I think that's just a really cool thing. So in a nutshell, this is DNS, and I urge you to play with it on your servers. Use your DNS server and try to get your other ones to resolve against it, and just make sure that you really have a handle on what's going on. I hope that this nugget has been informative, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.